Okay, so last week we were talking about smart plant instrumentation,
Oh yeah.
and and we touched on some of the other software packages and how there's this desire for, at least from some folks in the industry, this desire for the some sort of fully integrated engineering suite where everything kind of feels like it's all one app. And the term integration becomes relevant at that point. But then also, I think that term gets, I don't want to say misused, but it has multiple meanings. However, depending on your exposure in the industry, what you've seen, what you've been a part of, which way you're coming from, you treat it as different things, but it can be really confusing because someone with a different background might use the word and say, that's what I want. And then if you have a different perspective, you may misinterpret that. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
So we said, hey, we'll cover integration in a future topic, and it is the future. So we're gonna go right into that. So we drew on the board two scenarios. These are not meant to be one at the moment. We're going to first talk about integration in the context of the engineering project team, and then integration in the concept of the owner operator.
Yeah, because
Does that sound good?
I think they're two different things. I think they're totally different, and they have different purposes too, right? Your project is trying to execute and get the project built and up and running, and your operator is trying to maintain their plant.
Yeah,
So
and I think even within each of these guys, there's varying perspectives you can take. Like I think there's an integration perspective here that is heavily on automation of data moving, and there's also an approach where you can focus it more on analytics and quality reporting.
yeah, I
Does that
would
make
agree
sense?
with that. Yeah.
So I want to go right to the obvious one, like the one that I think most people, at least on the engineering side, if you use the term integration, it would go to that idea that instead of these having their own tools or having their own sort of silos, as you would say, the number one definition of integration that the engineering project persona would use is some sort of integration in the authoring. Meaning, if I draw an object on a PNID, that I can
Will it
push
show
it,
up in my
I
instrument
can
list
push it over to this database.
or my equipment
I can push
list?
it to the 3D database. I
Yeah.
can correlate it and link it together. And in theory, that reduces the authoring and increases the quality. Is that correct?
I don't know about increases the quality. I agree with you though, when in general on the project side, when people are talking about integration, they're saying, hey, I'm going to create a PNID. Can I instantly from my PNID get my equipment list, my instrument list? Can I get some kind of piping information in my model? Like just coming from PNID, right? Does it push it up into that data layer that you got drawn here, and then does it push it back down or pull it back down into these other authoring apps to use?
And we drew a part of the project, a big part of the project. You know, the 3D model, the PNIDs, instrumentation, electrical. This data layer, a little nebulous. Like I'm just saying, there is a level where you pull data out of these tools. You can check it, you can compare it, you can map it, do whatever.
That's
That's
right.
not necessarily in an app yet. Could be, maybe not. And then there's the potential of like an information management cloud tool that is more for actually visualizing it at that level.
Yeah.
You could even say Power BI might necessarily be one of those tools, but then you have other like market tools that are for that.
Yeah.
And in that primary definition of integration, the vision was that objects would be created here, they would go up to this level, and then they would be pushed into or accepted into the other levels.
Yeah, I would say that was the primary idea of integration is the push and the pull.
Yeah.
So you want to pull it back down into the other authoring tools or utilities or whatever you're using it for.
Exactly. And what that does, so right now not right now, in a project where you don't have that type of integration, each of these disciplines builds their work, they author their data, and then they cross-check it. So some of them are in series where you have to draw it on a drawing first before you build it in a list or something like that.
Yeah.
But in that instance, it feels like there's opportunity where you're like, maybe we could do this better if these were more interlinked, right? But it does bring up some challenges when you try to link it. Is that correct?
Yeah, it brings up a lot of challenges in my mind when you try to link it. And by linking, you're talking about pulling data back down into the authoring level. You can always push data up and link it up here and do your analysis reporting, but what you're really talking about when you're integrating right now is the pull back into
the pull back in. It sounds obvious, right? I'm going to draw a P&ID. It's going to have instrument objects on it. I should just put those in the instrument database.
Yes.
But like some of the challenges are there, well, the person that drew the P&ID, they don't actually understand instrumentation, not at a deep level, right? Traditionally,
not an engineering or even a design.
It's been more of like a drafting role, not really with an engineering discipline background. So the problem I got into is they're like, okay, well, what do I have to? I have to change now the way I draw it to supposedly have more knowledge and more information in order to be able to push it into another tool. Because just the simplified version that I would normally put on the P&ID, just a tag object, maybe I don't really know the type of that object. Maybe I don't really know as many details as I need. I don't really have a description.
So the problem you were saying that you were running into is then now you have to have more, if you're going to pull it into instrument, you'd have to have more instrument knowledge in the actual drafting of the P&ID.
I also have to put more data into that tool, data I wouldn't traditionally put there.
And then the question arises, does that data belong there?
Does it belong there? And is the efficiency gain of the push worth the inefficiency of changing the fundamental tool in the first place that I was using, right?
Yeah. I think that would be true across any of them, right? Like whether you're pulling data into your equipment or your 3D or electrical. I think that would be true, right? Like because then the question is who holds the master data for that discipline?
Well, you're right. If I want to get data from this drawing into this database, and I go into here and I tell my administrator, hey, I'm going to have to configure this tool more complicated than normal because the tool has more responsibility. It's doing half of this team's job. So, number one, I have to have more data in it, more properties, more drop-down fields, more configuration. Yeah. Number two, I have to have an intermediate where I'm going to pull it out and I'm going to have to maybe tweak it or double check it before it goes in over there. And then number three, if it gets over here and then I need to change it at some point, how much of that do I have to go back here to change and re-push? Or do I change into some sort of just comparison model at some point? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I also see a lot of problems. I mean, some of those problems that you're talking about right now is good. Other problems that you have specifically in your P&ID to like instrumentation would be not all your instruments in your instrument list are going to show up on a P&ID.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So then you come up with some sort of implied object that's not really shown here,
on there.
But I'm going to hide it and say that it is there so that when I expand that data to push it somewhere, it actually is available to go there.
Yeah.
Right. And then also, what if that push of data, it's not fully mature, it's the starting point. So these disciplines still have to go work on it.
Yeah.
Right. So it brings up a lot of questions. I kind of say sometimes, like, if I was on a really small project, and I was just doing it in my garage with just a couple of people, and I could just look over my shoulder and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Is that going to work? Well, then this integrated concept makes a lot of sense because I'm going to cover multiple tools at one time. I'm wearing multiple hats anyway. It's a small team. It doesn't matter to me. But when it's a big team and the team doing this might be in a different office than the team doing that, then those little nuances about, oh, well, you didn't draw this exactly right for me to automate it. I need you to redraw that. Or you didn't enter it quite right for me to automate it. Or you automated it, but now I want to change it. The handshakes there are harder. You got bigger teams trying to coordinate that. I think the idea still sounds attractive, and a lot of people from the outside looking in would be like, well, that sounds kind of obvious, right?
I think the idea in general sounds very attractive. I think in practice, though, and this is probably what you're getting at, the idea sounds attractive. In practice, it's not practical, and it's complicated because you have to add a whole, like, almost a whole layer of management, like administrative support or management of the push-pull scenario. You have to add more information or whatnot over here on your initial push and then pull into the other applications, which is difficult to do. And then inevitably what happens is then the question is who owns the data? Because if you're pushing data from one authoring tool into another authoring tool, then you're just inherently you're going to say, well, the data that I pushed over is owned by the first authoring tool. When that's not always the case, because it's not mature like what you're saying, right? Well, you just did that initial push over there to get the list out. You didn't want to own the data over there. Does that make sense?
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah, you might have an instance where you use that as a starting point, but then the receiver of it becomes the master. Yeah. Which is also a question back when you go to edit it. How do you navigate that?
And I think that idea came from the fact you were saying a minute ago that on a small project, maybe that's feasible, right? Like if you're working on a small project with a small team. But I actually think people took that idea and then they were like, hey, it would be better if it was on a bigger project, because then if I had thousands of instruments that I was dealing with on PNIDs, then I could push them over here and get my entire instrument list, right?
Yeah, or pipes between the 3D model and PNID.
I could push all the pipes over here and get all my pipes lists done. I actually see that, though, as more of an issue because it's not, in my mind, it's not scalable, and that's the problem. It sounds like it is, but in practice, it is not.
Yeah, like from a computer science standpoint, is this possible? Yeah, surely.
Sure. Yeah.
From a human standpoint, when the project kind of starts, they call it like a shotgun start or whatever, where everyone starts at
the same time.
Everybody's starting relatively similar. It's like, okay, well, does one discipline have time to wait on another to receive that data?
Correct.
And then, like we said, once you get further along in the project, at some point, everyone needs to have their own capability to finish the job without asking for help from everyone else every time they want to do something.
That's right. And they need to own their own destiny, if you will, because each one of these authoring tools for the project as a whole has specific deliverables that they have to produce, right? Like PNIDs, you're producing the PNID drawings, you might be producing a line list and so on and so forth. Instruments, you're producing an index, data sheets, loop drawings, wiring drawings, right? Electrical, you're producing your load list and your calculations, equipment, so on and so forth, right? So they have their own deliverables that they're responsible to deliver on the project in order to go to construction. And you don't want the deliverables in one discipline to be fully reliant on the information from another discipline, if that makes sense, in the push-pull scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, we kind of described more like the factory version of integration, which would mean like from the vendor, the idea that the tools natively have something tying them all together. And if you out of the box, there's a way to make that integration happen. That's kind of like the default version, I think, of integration that the industry, oil, gas, energy might describe.
Yeah.
Then there's what we've seen more of, which is two different things. One of those is smaller parts of integration where it might be a custom application that you built to do some of this push and pull, but on a smaller scale, like where it really fits.
Yeah.
And also that could be just like an import process, right? It could be that I do an extraction of all of this stuff. I give it to the discipline and I say, I'm giving you a head start, but not directly software wise. I'm giving you a head start with data. Actually, I guess it goes up into
Goes
here.
up, yeah.
And you say, okay, look, instrument, I grabbed you a whole bunch of data from PNID. I want you to use that, but it's not a really seamless integration. It's a multi-part scenario where you can edit it and import it, and it's a one-time deal where we kind of zapped it in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the way I see that going, and maybe this was the intent, the original intent, but they were missing a part of it is that analysis part that you were talking about, right? So the way I would see it going is, and maybe this is what you're getting at, is that you push information up into a data layer from maybe all of these different authoring tools, and then you run an analysis across it. So if you're looking at PNID and instrumentation, you run an analysis across the two to say, where are my gaps, right? And then maybe you have some instruments or devices in your PNID that don't exist in your instrument database or your data set, but it should. And then you can write some kind of import or pull back down into instrumentation for that information. But you have to do that gap analysis first in order to do that.
Okay, so I'm gonna write a couple of terms. One is out of the box integration, which I don't think that's the right term, but like the factory defaults.
Yep.
And then there's sort of manual, or there's custom development. Okay. Which is kind of like what we were just talking about, where you build your own little process that supports the idea of pushing and pulling, but it has a little more stewardship to it.
Yeah.
And then the third thing that I would consider integration that maybe by definition doesn't sound like it is just analysis and reporting. So I could make an argument that by bringing this data up here and checking it really well, that I'm helping everybody by giving you constant feedback on your work, that it's a form of integration because you're not in a silo, you're informed, right? You see everything, but you still control how you fix it. Does that make sense? Like when you see a discrepancy?
Yeah. In my mind, if you're talking integration and you're writing these three things on the board here, everybody jumps to the end integration where you're pushing and pulling data across the authoring apps, specifically in the project realm. But in my mind, integration actually starts with that layer that you're talking about right now, in that analysis phase where you push all the data into a data layer, and then you do a cross analysis on that information. That's a form of integration, and that's the first step.
Okay.
Or the first form of integration.
So I relabeled the first one. Can't see this 3. Publish, retrieve. How does that make sense to you?
Put it up there. Yeah.
And then custom development. Now, technically, analysis should be a part of all of these.
Well, and that's what I was saying. So you're labeling these as integration, and you got analysis as your third. But I actually think analysis is the first form of integration.
I think so too.
Like you'll never get to the publish and retrieve or even some of the custom stuff that you're wanting to do unless you're first pushing that into a common layer to do some type of analysis across it. And that is to me a form of integration. You are integrating the data from each one of these into a common area for that information.
So what I would say is, because I think this can actually, in some scenarios, stand alone.
I think so too.
It can be the entirety of your integration.
Yeah, you could stop here
because
if you wanted to.
because you're informing everybody to make them successful. If that goes well and there's an opportunity to do something about it, to automate something, you can.
You can.
But if you choose not to, it's not a ridiculous idea.
No, I think in that point, I think this is your highest ROI. I think you get your highest return on investment with that layer, because like you're saying, then you can do it. You can do your analysis across it, and that's a form of integration. You can get all of your reporting out of that. You can see where you have those gaps at between the twos, and then you can kind of create a strategy for how you want to further either automate the integration or not. Like, what do you want to do with that information? Like, who are you going to publish it to?
Yeah.
Who's going to consume it? Who's going to use it? So I think your highest ROI is there.
Now, I think people dismiss that one. And most of the time when we're in a new project discussion, people go right to number one and they say, where's the magic? I want to buy the magic. I want you to solve all my problems with some sort of automated conveyor belt project where everybody just does their little piece and at the end it all spits out perfect.
100%.
And the truth is, even if you're going to do that conveyor belt, you need to master the analysis component of that, because all the data still should stand up to the test of the data itself, right? And if you get to a point where you can do some of those automated push, pull, retrieve, publish, retrieves, great. But if you don't, that's not actually going to be a hindrance to your project. You can make that successful. But where I have seen is if you say, hey, I must have that perfect push-pull factory, I've seen that not go well, because maybe you don't put in the due diligence to understand the data. You assume that the tools are going to fix it all, and it just kind of gets all clogged up.
I think that happens a lot. A lot of assumption that the tool is going to do the work for you. But the problem I see with that is the tool is like a technology. It'll do the work for you if you know what work you want it to do.
Yeah.
But it can do almost like anything. So whenever I get into those discussions, figuring out what solution is, for a specific project, one of the first questions I ask is what data is important to you out of these, and how do you use it through construction? How are you going to use it for progress reporting, right?
Yeah.
That type of information, because that'll determine the analysis that you need, and then that'll determine what you can custom automate or what you can publish and retrieve. But if you don't know that and you just jump straight to the end, then you're going to want everything, and it can't do everything.
Yeah. Okay. And one of the follow-ups we had from our previous discussion is that a lot of the tools in this space here aren't really changing a lot. They've been around for a while. They do the things that they're supposed to do, but they're not evolving fast. And I think it's because the development community has been hearing from people that think they want this automated publish retrieve of everything. And a lot of the development effort seems to be going maybe into this layer where it's like, okay, that's great, I guess, but that hasn't proven to drive the projects yet, because most of the project teams that I've seen have dabbled with various forms of integration, but have settled with a more simplistic final resting state that's really hinging around a lot of analysis We haven't seen a lot of the magic project where every single integrated feature is used. I just haven't seen a lot of that really come to be.
I've seen some of that on like what you were kind of talking about. I've seen some of that on like proof of concepts or like what would consider like a unicorn type project where all of the data you already know all of the data and you're
Yeah.
just trying to prove that you could actually do it.
Yeah.
But in a standard project where you're trying to build a facility or expand a facility or whatever, there's a lot of unknowns that you starting out that you have to get into the project, actually do your engineering and design that you don't know what's going to come up.
Yeah.
Right. And so starting at your number one is very difficult. I haven't seen that successful at that stage.
Okay. Now, I would like to pivot a little bit and tell a different story from the owner operator side. Are we at a point here where you're comfortable stopping? Was there anything more you wanted to bring up?
Nah, yeah, I think we're at a good point. I mean, and more I think can be discussed on that because then you get into that analysis phase and then your custom dev and your gaps and then how can you push and pull back and what do you automate? I mean, that's all topics of discussion over there, but it all focuses on the project. And I think what you're wanting to do is say, hey, that's integration from a project perspective. What is the integration from an owner operator perspective?
Yeah. And when I get to the owner operator side, all of this stuff just kind of gets shrunk into their engineering data. The complexity that you had on the project slims down a little bit, and you say, okay, I want to take everything that was our final, right, and just kind of a subset of that because I don't need all of the details to run the business every day. And I want to package that into my core set of engineering data. So imagine, for the purposes of this discussion, that all of that gets bottled up into there, right?
Yeah.
And so now I have all my important schematics and my panel drawings and everything that I needed to build that facility. And then as an owner operator, I think the term integration is a brand new term. It is not pushing and pulling between a bubble on a drawing into a list of a drawing because I've already built a facility. Like that integration is to support the deliverable generation in the first place.
Yeah.
But this integration is when I have to work on a tag, when I have to work on a piece of equipment, and I need a relationship between the engineering data and my work order. Or when I need to calibrate a device and I need to have the field technician get integration between the calibrate, the field and the engineering data, or I need to put data in a handheld device for that person to troubleshoot something, or I have a work order here that's going to go to the field and going to have to come back. That's business integration. And
that's at a different level.
It's a totally different term,
level. Yeah.
Right? And like at this point, when you're doing this, all of that integration has basically been paused. You don't need to, because at this point, you may go into a totally different MOC management process. You might have a redlining process, the updates of those documents, because they have a heavy relationship now as a document. There's a database behind them in some cases, but that integration, I don't even think it's the same word. Like that's project integration. You don't carry that forward. Here, it's business system integration. A Hexagon, Octave, Aviva app integrating with SAP or Maximo.
Yeah.
And SAP or Maximo integrating with a field technician team, or these guys grabbing, going from an HMI screen to get to a data sheet to integrate all the way down to having the source of truth that they need, right?
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think they are too. Now, the only comment I would say there is that this environment that you're talking about goes into
your engineering data like ecosystem. So this continues to be an ecosystem, and you will still have churn just in this environment for updating the engineering data.
You will, but
Right.
the one that translate the most is analysis.
Correct.
You'll keep
Yeah.
the analysis, like, hey, am I accounted for all my tags? Are my
Yeah.
drawings still in alignment? But you won't keep a lot, like a common integration here is to take all the cables from electrical and all the cables from instrumentation, combine them together and route them in a 3D model.
Yeah.
I don't do that here.
No,
I'm doing one
it's
cable.
it's already done.
I'm doing one cable at a time over here, right? So that integration, I just put that on ice and say, hey, that was great during the project. Pause. I don't need to use that anymore. Maybe I'll have some big greenfield addition to this plant where I'll have a secondary project, more like a capital project, get started. But I think some, like us on the engineering side, some people assume that the integrations they built during the project are going to have a life here. And this slows down and this simplifies versus what was you were doing in the volume and the pace of that project.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would say that that's where we come back to the analysis. It would be the most important one again, your highest ROI.
So
But then the word integration, like you're saying, changes because what they're most concerned about is then integrating the engineering data to their asset data or their operation data. They're not saying, hey, I need to integrate P&ID data to instrument data. No, it's I need to integrate engineering data to SAP is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think all of that kind of bundled, put in a box and said, hey,
Yeah.
all right, all of that's now
Here.
under control. We got one source of truth and it's here.
Now we got to integrate it.
Now
to
we
our
have
other
to
systems.
integrate it to other systems. And so now if we get a new object on drawing, that object needs to have a record in the asset management system.
Yeah.
That object needs to have a work plan. It needs to have a procedure. And I need to be able to get to those things efficiently. This is where a digital twin comes in. Like when people say a digital twin for the project, okay, yeah, there's kind of one by default. You build the whole thing virtually during the project. That's the whole point of the project. We have a virtual object. It doesn't exist yet. So it's not even a twin. It's a digital plant. But once you build a real plant, you build this becomes a twin of it.
That. Yeah.
And so in the twin concept, now you're saying, oh, I work at this place, this physical place, but if I have a replica of it digitally, then I can easily go from being in the field to getting the source of truth I need, to getting the work order that I need, to planning the work, to doing all of that. And so the business integration here, sometimes it is a push, right? You create a tag, it automatically gets created here or whatever. Sometimes it's an update. I update something on a handheld calibrator and I zap it into a document system to prove that I calibrated it, right? Or I tested it or something like that. But these are not the same. That's project integration.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Is that fair? Okay.
I think that's a good start to this integration conversation because I do think this is a longer conversation to get into more details on the project side versus the operations side, and then how those two actually work together. So maybe this is like a 3 or 4 part conversation almost.
Yeah, I think we should get somebody in here who's really passionate about this and has done that. That can add some perspective there they want to add.
Yeah.
And then we can do the same on this side. But it's understanding that sometimes terminology has different meanings based on your background. And if you don't know that, you might end up inadvertently trying to, deploy something that really doesn't fit.
Yeah.
The other thing is, when you're working in this environment, to me, you really only have one version of the thing you're building. It is the project. But then when you're working here, you have what's operating and what you're modifying. So you have your as-built versus your projects that are happening, your brownfield type stuff.
Your MOCs or your FOPs or whatever is going on.
And so part of the reason that the complexity of this integration of all the pushing and pulling here doesn't apply as much here
Over there.
is because this is kind of like the multiverse over here. Now you got multiple copies of the same drawing, same piece of equipment with different parties trying to help work on it. So the complexity that just gets naturally baked in to dealing with that means that I can't afford to have some of these crazy push-pulls because I don't have the nice little Petri dish project that I was working on in the office. I already have this sort of spaghetti bowl thing that I'm trying to balance. And so I think the sophisticated integration here kind of gets pushed aside and you go for the business integration over here.
I would agree with that.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's step one in the integration journey. And we'll have more to add later. Thank you.
Thank you.